How was your weekend week since I chatted with you?
Um, I never remember. Hold on. This always feels like a trick question. It was here. Hold on. I got it. It was good. How about
Okay. Okay, that works. Yeah,
that?
that
Yeah.
works.
How
It
about you? You all right?
was good. It was good. It was good.
I see what you did there. Nicely done.
Yep.
And what we've just done is we've just created a bonding moment. That yeah. See, we shared.
Yeah. We've both really made each opened the intimacy channels and
That's
shown
exactly right.
vulnerability to one another.
That, it's exactly right. And we are closer now as a
Because
result.
we both know that the other guy found is good.
It's good. Yeah. That's how it was
um,
done by men up until like 1980, until 1995, probably. It's like, fine, fine, cool, cool. And you're done. Yeah.
Well, I distinctly remember moving to New York and being with a bunch of overachievers from various like states and provinces across North America.
Uh-huh.
And man, the pressure dialed up massively to say that you'd done something respectable over a weekend. It was like, hey, what'd you get up to on the weekend? Sort of
Yeah.
like
What do you have to say? Like,
I made ramen noodles and like put fresh line on my fishing reel, like doesn't count as a weekend's
got it.
accomplishments.
Would it have to be like work related, or could it have been like, I served the poor and like fed the hungry? Could it be that, or would it
Yeah,
have to be like,
yeah.
I actually decided to roll into the office, get a little extra work done? Would it be more of that?
No, it was more the kind of Rhodes Scholar extracurricular activity stuff.
Jeez,
Yeah,
life's too short.
yeah,
We're
that
all under
was.
enough pressure as it is. I'm lucky to just get my butt out of bed in the morning and like not kill my children or myself, right? So, there you go.
And I encountered another version of that in coming to Singapore, because Singapore is like a 1 hour shot to about 15 interesting exotic destinations.
Yeah,
So the
true.
what did you do on the weekend was sort of a competition for like, well, which flight did you take to take what bus to end up in some like National Geographic
That's a
location.
fair point. Yeah. And have
Uh,
you done any of that?
I've done some of it. Although,
Okay,
uh,
that's good.
God, I was gonna sound like a spoiled child to say like it kind of gets old. It gets old in the sense that like sometimes what you want to do is sleep in a little bit
Yeah, that's my point,
and
right? Sometimes you just
cook your
exactly
leftovers
and
and
watch some Netflix and catch up
exactly.
on all the like binge Star Trek for like a weekend, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. No.
And then that's actually the way to compete with the conversation about like who had the most productive or
Yeah.
exotic weekend. It's like, you know what I did? I'm gonna shame you all.
Yep. Well, Kevin, I think
I
just
didn't even leave my house.
generally as a rule, whenever the conversation zigs, you always want to zag. That's kind of where Challenger came from, right? So you always want to go in the opposite direction
Yes.
because you're
Yes.
breaking schema, right? You're always constantly looking to break schema. You're always because that makes you memorable. If it may make you memorable in the wrong way, but at least it makes you memorable, right? But it is a demonstration of your power and your agency to not follow the crowd, but to do what you want to do.
I even as you were saying that, I was thinking of one more act of desperation that I did where I zagged when everyone was zigging, not because
Yeah,
I was so clever and sort of self-actualized, but when I lived in Hong Kong for a year, they're insane about watches and expensive watches. So you're meant to spend just some exorbitant amount of your salary on some piece of chronography that sits
right.
on your wrist and it shows
Uh,
off something about you, I
yeah.
guess.
So you buy a
Um,
Swatch, or you'd actually no, that's even too cool. You buy like a Timex or something. I don't know,
well,
right?
the real hack is you just stop wearing a watch altogether,
Oh,
and
there's
then
that.
and then
That's
you're
just
just
weird. Though.
like
That freaks me out a little bit.
you just float above the conversation somehow.
Yes. Yeah.
But what you did see, the fancy pants fund managers, so these guys who've been like a portfolio manager for 25 years and clearly
Yeah.
had a lot of money, they would wear what was it, like the entry level Casio?
Nice. Yeah.
Sort of the one that looks like it was
See, now that's just showing
late
off.
80s.
You know what I mean? It's like I am so rich. I don't even have to tell you how rich I am.
Exactly. I won't even do you the courtesy of playing the game.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like I opted out. I'm good. Thank you. It's like that's some serious wealth, right? It's either serious wealth or serious mental health, one or the other. It might even be both. That's the magical quadrant that you want to be in right there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if that one exists.
That is a different kind of zigging and zagging. You can
Yeah.
zigging and zagging can be just a sign of absolute lunacy, I suppose.
True. Oh, well, actually, see, the trick with zigging and zagging is that if you zig and I zag, I'm still zagging relative to your zig. So I'm
Yeah,
still
right.
stuck in the Hegelian dialectic, right? I'm still doing something in response to your thing. So I'm still trapped inside the system of meaning creation, right? So,
Yep.
so have I really escaped? Probably not, right? The fact that you chose to not wear a watch was in direct response to the fact that other people were wearing very fancy watches. It wasn't just because you decided on your own. It's like, I don't think I need a watch, right? So it's very hard to get out unstuck even when you do the opposite.
Yeah.
We're all in the hologram or in the holodeck together. You can't get out of it. Thank you for the podcast. Cheers. It's good to be with you. Sorry, I thought that was it.
No, yeah. That's the stuff we'll keep. Let's get into the stuff. Let's get into the stuff.
All right, let's get the stuff that's no good. All the crappy sales stuff.
I want to talk about sense making for sales.
Okay, cool.
But just before this, I was speaking with the head of sales for Link, which is a big expert network firm, and she was like, "My daughter has been given a copy of Challenger as her internship. It's mandatory reading. Can you imagine that interns are receiving hard copies of the Challenger sale? It's become orthodoxy."
Which is a little creepy. Do you know what I mean? The last thing I ever wanted to do, it's kind of ironic in some ways that a book called Challenger becomes orthodoxy.
It's
so think about that for a minute, right? Just let that just seep through the marinade of that for a little bit. But I'll tell you, all joking aside, it is intensely humbling. It also makes me, I don't know, Kevin. It's like, oh, but stop. There's new things we've learned. It's like, yeah, I kind of want to go out and I guess it would mean writing a new edition or something like that, but no one's ever going to read a new edition. So, because they've already read the first one at this point. So I don't know what you do about it. It's like we used to study this stuff when I was a grad student studying literature and literary interpretations, is that as an author, you effectively lose control of a text as soon as it's birthed, right? And that's kind of where we're at now. That became pretty clear like the second that thing went out the door and people said, here's what it means to be a challenge. I said, no, it's not even close. But now we're 10 years on, and not only is that still happening, but also the original Challenger story is no longer directly lined up with the context within which because the context has changed, right? So it's like we're twice removed from that original story in some really interesting ways. So it always, I'm sincerely flattered. I don't know. I don't know that I should be flattered because people aren't doing it on my behalf. So I don't know if it's flattery, but it's pretty cool. I mean, just flat out, it's pretty cool to see that happening. But I've kind of also moved on too. So like this challenge, not in the sense I don't believe it, I still do, but it's again in a different context. But it's just kind of its own thing now that just kind of lives out there on its own and has its own life force and does its own thing. And it's always endlessly fascinating to see what becomes of it. And I still line up a bunch of copies on my desk, on my shelf over here, because apparently I'm humble bragging about it. I don't know. So I got a Room Raider the other day. That was like my life's goal achievement. Do you know what Room Raider is, Kevin?
No.
It's a Twitter account called Room Raider. And for the last 3 years since the pandemic started, it's like, so these anonymous people who are no longer anonymous because they decided to cash in and write a book on it. But they would go on Twitter and they would rate your room, very much like my room here.
Oh, yes, I heard
they
of
talk
this.
about the plants and the depth and the color, and then they would give you tips on how to. And I got a 9 out of 10, which I'm quite proud of. I'm very excited about this. And I got dinged for having my own books on my shelf behind me. And it's like,
yes.
And it's like, that's totally fair. That is straight up ego. So they got to go. I haven't figured out what I'm going to put there instead. But I actually wrote it. I replied to Room Raider on Twitter and apologized. I said, I'm sorry. I feel highly shamed right now. So I have a fraught relationship with the Challenger, to say the least. But but it's cool.
You probably have to keep track of who you've gifted them to, so you don't do the ultimate faux pas of giving people a second copy.
No, because no one asks for them anymore, so I'm good. I joke all the time. I use my copy to prop up the kitchen table leg so the table doesn't wobble. That's what I do with mine. Wow.
Okay, so it was an idea that you had, or an idea that had you for a time, and now that Brent Adamson doesn't exist, and this one does, and that context doesn't exist. The only thing that exists anymore is the book.
On its, well, that's not true. I'm still here too, I think, although we can never truly be sure. But yes, I mean, there's all sorts of branching narratives. There's different, Matt and I, while still great friends and colleagues in a more of a theoretical than a practical sense, have gone off to do different things. And many of the team who are involved in building that have gone off and they're doing amazing, cool things elsewhere too. So it's like a tree, right? It all branches out and goes in different directions in very cool ways, but it's still tied back to a single trunk. Wow, that was beautiful.
It
No,
was good. It
wasn't.
was actually really good until you dissed it.
That's what happened. I know. I tell you. This is what happens when you get me early in the morning and you late at night. Nothing good's going to come of this, Kevin. But anyway.
Let us make sense of sense making. Okay, so of the different things that you branched off to do, or ways that you adapted, evolved, and changed your thinking, you had this idea of sense making. I really like that. Not that what I really like dictates what should be written and published, but to me, that was actually a much more accessible, usable, practical précis of how somebody might go about the business of being a seller. So sense making, maybe, I mean, I think this is the way to put it, Brent. Say a few sentences so that people will just read the article.
Okay.
That's it. Don't reprise the article, because that isn't a fair question. But
well, I'll tell you a couple things. So, Kevin, you're not the first person to say what you just said about. The last time I heard that was a number of executives in Amsterdam back in the before times we traveled. They said this sense making material is so much more. In fact, they may even use the word accessible, but they said, I can do this. I look at this and I know what to do about this. We could talk a little bit more about the idea and what it means and why it's important in a second. But one of the reasons why I think is because we worked particularly hard. This is work, by the way, that I created with, I was part of a team that created it at Gartner right before my departure. And then we published it in the Harvard Business Review in January, February of 2022, right? So and the article is called Sensemaking for Sales, but it's based on a huge amount of research. And we could talk about that a little more in detail in a minute. But the thing, actually, given what you do for a living, it'd be really interesting to get your thoughts on this, because the thing that actually always I struggled with Challenger, and I think we've kind of won the battle with on sense making, is when I present sense making, write about it, talk about it, I tell people emphatically, this is not a sales methodology. It is not meant to be the all singing, all dancing, how to manage your pipeline, how to run a sales process. Mm-hmm. All it is a technique. It's a very powerful technique, but it's just that. It's a technique for how you might engage your customers, specifically with information. And the reason why that matters is because that's one of the things that's really evolved significantly since the Challenger work came out originally, is that the world of information that we live in today is just radically different than it was 12 years ago. But it is not, so the answer is not be a sense maker. In fact, when we first published this work, we called sense making the sense maker rep, and people lost their minds. I presented in London, and there was 3 companies there who had just rolled out Challenger, and they were, all joking aside, they were literally upset. They were angry at me. It's like, Brent, we just rolled out Challenger this week to our companies. Now you're telling me I got to go back to them and say we got it wrong, be a sense maker instead. And I think this is what happens, is we tend to want to take these ideas and inflate them to make them bigger and broader. And people at the very beginning of Challenger used to ask me all the time, is Challenger a sales methodology? And I would say, no, it's research. It's all it's ever meant to be, is a really interesting research project that gave us a little bit more insight into how to sell effectively. It has since evolved for a number of different reasons into, do you do Spin? Do you do Wilson? Do you do Miller Hyman? Or do you do Challenger? And I've always struggled to think of it that way. And I think that's why people are now gravitating to SenseMaking in some ways, because it feels like I could take a step back. I don't have to rip out the infrastructure of my organization. I don't have to retrain reps from beginning to end on all. It's just, here's a technique that you can practice. So, I find in that respect, and yet it's incredibly powerful. So there's a lot of bang for the buck. Maybe that's a way to think about it.
Mm-hmm. You talk about an information strategy.
Yeah.
That was the kind of term that if I hadn't read it within the context of that article, I might have rolled my eyes and said, oh no, an information strategy. But actually, if you think
right.
about it as like something in the hands, a tool in the hands of that outbound, intrepid sales soul who actually just has to forge
Yeah.
agreements, have conversations, get things done. A strategy around information, not information that they need, but that they need to provide. Actually, that is pretty fresh. It's something that you don't see referenced elsewhere, and it would change what those folks are up to.
Yeah. I think so. It felt fresh to us. And you know, and it all came from one specific finding in the research that we did at Gartner, which is, and we've corroborated this, and the team, right about the time I departed, we just re-corroborated this finding. But somewhere roughly around in the article, we talk about 89% is now about 92. So we'll call it just 90, roughly about 90% of B2B buyers, complex sales, tell us that generally speaking, the quality of information they encountered as part of a purchase decision is of high quality. In other words, just to step back from that a little bit, is that customers are telling us, well, let's step back even one more step real briefly, but if you think about where we were when information started overwhelming, well, 10 years, I got this, I could do this, I promise. But if you think about 10 years ago, we'd already begun to talk about customers empowered with information, that they were learning on their own, that they could do their own research, they could delay, interactions with a sales rep. We talked a lot about that in the second Challenger book, the Challenger customer. But from the customer's point of view, it was largely a story of empowerment. I am empowered with information. I'm now allowed to learn on my own. I can do my own due diligence. And for them, it was largely a process of separating signal from noise, or wheat from chaff, whatever metaphor you like. It's like, I got to find the good information. As we all kind of realized customers were doing that, and then we said, well, we all need to be better at providing them information. This is an opportunity. They're out there learning on their own. Let's give them the information that they seek. And marketers got a hold of this and built out, we all kind of, at one moment, somewhere about 7-8 years ago, woke up and said, you know what we need to do? Hold on. We need to be a thought leader in our industry, because if we can be a thought leader, we can demonstrate to our customers that we're smarter, that we have progressive ideas, that we can help them with their mission critical priorities. And right about that time, marketers latched on to content marketing as a strategy. And then all of a sudden they were empowered with, think about Scott Brinker's diagram with all the MarTech technology, right? So there was better and more technology than ever before to produce and distribute that content at scale. And now we've got big data that allows us to do better analyses than ever before. And so what happened, it wasn't just the quantity of information went up, but the quality of that quantity of information went up at the same time. And where that leaves customers now is a place where I'm just overwhelmed, not just like, wow, there's a lot of information out there, so this separating signal from noise is harder. It's, wow, there's a lot of information out there, and it's all pretty good. It's predominantly signal, as it were. But the trouble is, now I've got my signals crossed, because you're telling me to zig, they're telling me to zag, you've got data, they've got data, and it just becomes so overwhelming. I don't really know what to do. So psychologically, it's fascinating. What happens is it puts me in a position of saying, well, I don't really know what to do. I did a lot of research, and I'm more confused than ever before. You know what I better do? Which I do, Kevin. Yeah. I know. I'm going to do even more research, right? And then I get even more confused, and I wind up in this spiral of learning. Like it's the old paralysis of analysis, the analysis by paralysis by analysis situation. And so, okay, so all that, so that's kind of the context. That was really not the case 10 years ago when we published Challenger. So you think about Challenger now. I, by the way, still stand by it. I still think it's right. But if you play out Challenger in its rawest or purest form today, where I build a commercial insight and show up the customer either digitally or in person and say, here's a commercial insight that will challenge your thinking, that just becomes yet one more thing I've got to consider in this landscape of overwhelmedness, but too many other really great things to consider. You haven't helped me. It's like, so I'll never forget, I was presenting in California right before the pandemic, and someone said, but Brent, we're talking about this idea. He said, Brent, I did what you told me to do, which is always a terrifying thing to hear, right? But particularly when I hear from my kids, but they said, but I built commercial insight. The whole market's telling our customers we should do this, and we're telling customers they should do that. And so we're out there with a differentiated message with a lot of research and a lot of evidence. And so we're challenging. And I said, that's great, probably a good idea, but nonetheless, if now I just got competing ideas and they're both believable and they're both backed by data and they both have experts supporting them, think about it from your customer's perspective. Think about what that feels like. It doesn't feel particularly helpful. It's like, oh, great, here's just one more thing I've got to consider. And you just kind of shut down and tell everyone, just leave me alone, right? It's like the equivalent to that in sales or in buying is call me back in 6 months, which they never really want you to call them back in 6 months, right? That's just code for leave me alone. And so all of that, now bring it around full circle, Kevin. I'm telling you, I'm going to bring it home now. Watch me work. So the thing that tells me, and I think indicates to all of us, is that we as sales professionals today need to simply take this into account. We have to understand the context. And that's the word I think that really sums up this entire idea of sense making. We have to understand the context within which our information that we're providing customers sits. So how do we help them make sense, not just out of the information that we're giving them? How do I help them make sense out of all of the information that they're getting or receiving or consuming from all sources, including, by the way, potentially my competitors? Because that's where they need help. Because if they can't sort through that, they can't organize and prioritize and analyze that information on their own, they're going to choose not to choose, and you're going to lose as a result. So I think if we think about sort of differentiated opportunities or opportunities for differentiation, opportunities to set yourself apart and how you engage with customers, you could be the one and only person to show up and say, you know what, there's a lot of information out there. Let me see if I could just help you make sense out of all of it. And that's, you told me not to read, so I did it anyway. I couldn't help myself, but that's the whole argument in a nutshell.
Okay, now it's my chance to be like, awesome podcast, bro. We'll talk soon.
Exactly. Thank you and good night from Singapore.
How do you well, I'll give you a line from the article. Sense making is not an exercise in free consulting.
How do you get paid to do this? Yeah. Is that kind of where you're going?
I think there's a little bit of a leap of faith required for the average guy or gal who's like, wait a minute, what if I lead them carefully, methodically through trust and a careful handhold down the garden path all the way to signing a check for $153,000 from my direct competitor, and then I can not only tell Brent Adamson I did what you told me to do, I can tell my boss I did what Brent Adamson told me to do.
Oh God,
you know,
that's even worse.
in my quarterly review.
Yeah.
But it's not so simple an equation like, hey, just
and yet the competitor won the business. That's your point, right? It's like I do all this sense making stuff and I still lose, right?
Yeah.
I've got an answer. What's your take? Let me ask you this. I never do this. How would you respond to that?
Well, I'll tell you how I digested your work. There's another fellow who wrote a book called How Clients Buy, Tom McMakin. Interesting guy, interesting book. That book is mainly on how professional services consulting firms need to sell. And the first thing that I mentioned to him was, this book starts with how, which is interesting. And most sales books that start with how, you can actually anticipate, almost like a Google like word fill, what's going to come next. And it's never about what clients do. It's what a salesperson's supposed to do. Yeah. And the title of his book is a giveaway to the posture that he takes all the way through, which is, let's just study this species. You know, the way that a biologist is going to study, you know, the woody downy woodpecker, the downy woodpecker or something. Let's just study it and see what it does, right? Where does it drink? What does it eat? What does it do? And How Clients Buy was a really interesting text because he didn't really say a whole lot about what the salesperson, which in professional services is not a salesperson, it's just the senior partner, is supposed to do. It says what the other person is trying to do. And so sense making, I thought, was like the way that I took it in was, it's actually the client who's trying to make sense. It isn't whereas Challenger, it's the salesperson who's trying to challenge. Right. And so sense making is this thing where you have to be a teacher, a counselor, a guide, a listening ear, a support, a temporary librarian, and all these other things. And actually that's no problem. So the fact that you are the one who may benefit from providing all the information is almost a paradoxical, unusual position to be in, but it still works. You can still be the person who said, look, I'll help you make a decision. It might come my way. It might go somebody else's way. But ironically, by saying that, you usually comes your way.
Exactly. When it's interesting there, Kevin, is I don't know that it's ironic per se. I think it's actually people a lot smarter than me have written quite a lot about this. And I think one of the best places to go for this is Robert Cialdini, and his book Influence, which hopefully everyone's read. If you haven't, it's one of these canonical books that we all read. It's like Kahneman. It's like just right up there on the Mount Rushmore of great books that you read. There's an American reference. Sorry, but I think it's Cialdini would talk about a value exchange. And what he's talking about here is not sales, right? He's talking about human beings. He's talking about how we as humans operate and interoperate with one another. And to simplify and probably frankly oversimplify his arguments a little bit, maybe even unfairly, but this idea of value exchange is what you're in helping me make sense out of everything that's out there, because it's overwhelming, it's frustrating. In other words, when I go out and try to make a purchase with a lot riding on it, $1 million purchase on behalf of my company, and I feel confused and overwhelmed. Notice those aren't things that I know or don't know. Those are things that I feel, right? So this has a very visceral emotional impact on buyers. It's confusing, it's frustrating. I've done this for years. I've gone out and asked senior executives around the world, think back to a purchase you made on behalf of your organization in the last 18 months. Think about all the people who are involved and the processes and all the time it took, and then give me one word, one adjective that describes that overall experience for you. And it's maybe not surprising, but it's still nonetheless fascinating when you have that exercise. And dudes, I've done this with thousands of people now. And the words are always awful, frustrating, painful. Someone said, I never want to do that again. That was their word. I said, that's their words. I would never want to do. You can see it in their eyes. It was a CRM purchase, right? But notice all of those are visceral answers, right? Those are things that you feel. And I think that's what's so interesting about sense making. Sense making is not so much a technique that operates at the rational level. Well, it does do that. Let's take information, let's sort it out, let's put it in buckets, let's figure out what to believe, let's prioritize it. So all of that is a sort of a rational cognitive exercise. But I think where it really works on the affective level, on the visceral level, at the emotional level, it's like you're helping, because what you're really doing, we saw this in data from Gartner, it's in the article as well, is where you're really operating is on the level of customers' confidence, right? Which is not so much something you know, but something you feel. It's customers' confidence, not in you. Oh God, I love that Kevin. I have so much confidence in him. It's rather, it is operating this level of confidence in myself and how I feel. I feel better that I've looked at the right information. I feel more confident that we've asked the right questions. I feel confident in moving forward with this decision. So in you interacting with me as a sense-making sales rep, engaging in sense, helping me notice I'm the one making sense. You're not making sense of it for me. You're creating a framework within which I can make sense of things. That's really what sense making is about, so that I feel more comfortable and confident to take action. You've just given me a means to feel better about myself. And the value exchange is, I will attach value to that. There's value in me feeling better about myself. Right? So, oh, there's so many jokes there. I'll touch on so, but so what I want to do though, most of them have to do with manic depression, but I won't touch it because people don't want to go there, right? So so I will repay that. I will repay that in ways with business. It's not. What's interesting about this? It's not a conscious transaction. Oh, you made me feel confident. Here's $1 million. It's not that. It's more subconscious, and it's not guaranteed either. But I will remember that. I will attach to this goodness of the feeling I have. I will associate with you, and that comes back in all sorts of really interesting ways. Now, is that a guarantee that you're going to win the deal? No. But by the way, this is always true of Challenger, too, as well, right? So it's the free consulting trap. The broader argument here is, who's your competitor, right? So in other words, if I engage in sense-making with my customer, and I help them come to a point where they're more confident to make, not just to take action, but take a bigger action, make a bigger purchase rather than a small purchase. And you think, well, what if they use that confidence to buy from my competition? I would argue that's a loss, right? That's a bummer. I think we all would. That's a bummer, right? But notice you did win in this sense, that your original competitor was status quo. And I think that's the thing that we are, the conversation you have with Matt Dixon around his new book, Jolt Effect, I think is so interesting, right? Because the Jolt Effect, which is coming out in theaters near you, is all about this idea. It's not that customers embrace status quo, it's that they fear change, right? It's that it's like, I hate what I'm doing now, but I don't want to just this is describes, it's like that book's like autobiography for me, or biography for me. It's like, that's my whole life, right? It's like, I don't like what I'm doing now, but I don't want to change. It's too terrifying. It's all of us, right?
Yeah.
And so I think what's really interesting about this is, if that's your quote unquote, your competition, your competitor, the thing that we're battling, if we want to grow as a company, I think what we really have to do is not steal more share from the competition. For most of us, there's always a market share steal play to be had, right? It's like, gotta get a bigger, disproportionately large piece of the pie. But the bigger opportunity, I think, for almost all of us, is to make the pie bigger. And the way you make the pie bigger is getting more people to feel more confident in making bigger decisions on behalf of their company and just maintain your share of the pie.
Mhm.
And so that's what I love about sense making is it unlocks commerce. It unlocks decisions by unlocking confidence or building confidence. So that might feel too abstract for someone. That might feel too indirect for someone. It's like, no, I want to say these words and get this deal. And there's no guarantee in Challenger. There's no guarantee. Heck, there's probably no guarantee. So show me something where there is a guarantee. I don't know that there is a guarantee in any of that, right? So the thing I think we need to solve for is helping customers feel more confident to make bigger decisions on behalf of their company. That's how I would think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're standing up in like an intelligence squared debate having to justify this, but that is a strong defense, by the way, is like, well, what's your alternative? Keep
Yeah,
on pitching and like and loading them up with more information that more deeply confuses them. I mean,
exactly.
what's your
No,
hit right there?
no.
What's
That's
your hit
more
right there?
SDRs. It's more SDRs doing more cold calls. That's always the answer.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Fill the top of your funnel.
And social selling.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was unfair to people who dedicate their entire career to that. But your point is really well taken, right? So, whenever we introduce, or I'm part of a team that introduces these new, somewhat disruptive ideas, there's a lot, and I get it, right? Because like this is new, it's different, it's unproven, it's untested. 10 years on with Challenger, it's pretty tested, right? But but I simply, it's maybe unfair and even maybe a little snarky, and I don't mean it that way, but it's like, what are you going to do? Just keep doing what you're doing? How's that working out for you? So it's like that's, and we're at a place now, I think, and the pandemic has only revealed this to a greater degree. Like when the tide goes out, it just every shows all this stuff that's been on the beach shows up in ways that you hadn't. Like, what's the saying? When the tide goes out, you find out who's wearing pants. I love that.
Exactly.
That's a great line. That's not mine. That's someone famous, I think. But anyway, but so as things have gotten worse, I think it's exposed all sorts of ways in which our current go-to-market models are underperforming. And at the same time, it's not just like at the same time, it's not that customers are at the same level of frustration and concern and lack of confidence. I think that's actually gone up. They're more confused. They're more overwhelmed. They're more concerned with. Just look at the massive amount of uncertainty within which we're operating today across political, social, environmental. I mean, it's amazing any of us can get out of bed and just like put pants on, let alone make $1 million decisions on behalf of our company. I often used to tell our head of research at Gartner, I said, his name's Eric. He's a great guy. He's a good friend. I used to tell him, and I meant this. It was tongue in cheek, but kind of not. I said, Eric, it's kind of amazing to me that commerce still happens at all. And Eric, to which Eric would always say, Brent, you're an idiot, which is true. Because he'd say, look, commerce still has to happen. You still have to replenish supplies. You still have to buy repair parts. You still have to build out plants. The commerce will always happen. And I always look at him and say, yeah, but Eric, it does make me wonder how much more commerce could happen and would happen if people just felt a little bit more confident to make bigger decisions on behalf of their company. And that's what sense making is all about. Sense making is all about seeing if we can just get a little bit more commerce to happen by helping people feel more confident, particularly at a time where everything's working completely against us to undermine that confidence.
Mm-hmm. When you're in the research, the Gartner research.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm curious to what you're going to do now that you're not at Gartner to just get massive, chests of gold coins in the form of research. I just envision you on one of those big walls, like turning the big dial and just opening it up, like a research gold mine at Gartner. So I'm curious what you're going to do in the future about partnerships. That wasn't my question.
Okay, but we would come back to it. It's actually, if I may, I'd love to talk about it. But go ahead. Your question, yes, sir. Your question is.
Actually, I've got a couple, so I'm gonna go with this one. Here was one of my difficulties with Challenger. Is I saw, and I did make I just realized I made this reference about this lady's daughter getting it for her internship.
Yeah.
Challenger was a tool that a lot of people get starry-eyed about, and they want to share it with their junior sales representatives, and it isn't a methodology that people can actually really do in that way. Challenger requires this certain kind of sharp analytical character who's not only willing to do careful, thoughtful analysis, but be a bit of a maverick and come out with something iconoclastic, and then teach it across their organization so that they can go teach it to clients. Like you can see where the problem's going to come in, right? There's going to be a game of telephone, and you're going to have
Yeah.
some knees knocking, sort of nervous, person looking at the tips of their shoes, mumbling out some clever thing that someone at their own organization said, which is the
Yeah.
big challenge. Isn't that a little bit the case in sense making as well? So
A
if we
little bit.
gave this to Raja and Tan lawyers here, you'd be like, well, this isn't going to be a problem because they're a bunch of natural sort of like teachers, guides, subject matter experts. They can weigh in the heavyweight rounds for 15 rounds, no problem. If you give it to a bunch of SDRs in a SaaS organization,
Yep.
doesn't it kind of come unbound?
Maybe. so your point's well taken. Like for Challenger, it's funny, whenever I would present at sales kickoffs, and I've done that many times over the years, I would always want to sit down with the head of sales first, and particularly if I was brought in by sales enablement and say, hey, can you we're having a sales kickoff, we needed a keynote speaker. That's like alarm bells going off. We needed a keynote speaker, you're available, could you come tell them about Challengers? Like, I can, and then I will get them excited about something you're not going to do anything about, and then they will just be bitter and disappointed 3 months. It's like, I'll tell you, Kevin, I learned this the hard way. I've done some significant damage in companies unintentionally by getting up on stage saying, go be a challenger, and not having the organization ready to support that message down the road. Because then it doesn't make me look bad, it makes the company look bad in the eyes of their sales reps. And that's not a cool thing. So I learned the hard way pretty quickly on, or early on, that like, there's like readiness checks. And that's, I think, true with any of these kinds of ideas, and Sensemaking's probably one too. But sometimes those heads of sales would say to me, yeah, Brent, I get all that, and we're going to work. It's like, oh God, this is so bad. We're going to work on that. But could you just get up on stage and get them excited about? But what they were saying is, it's like, and sometimes the answer was yes, sometimes the answer is no. I did a lot more probing in that sense, but in those cases. But what they were trying to say is, I get it that this is organizational capability, but as you state in the book, Brent, which is true, it's also individual skill. There are certain things that individuals can do to adopt a challenger posture, to downplay just the relationshipy sort of, hey, how are the kids? Like, there's nothing wrong with asking how the kids are if you know something about it, but don't think that that's going to win you the deal, right? So recalibrating sales reps' mental model around what works, I think, is still a good thing to do. And I think, to bring it to Sensemaking, which is actually where your question lives, the same thing here is that, because in the article we lay this out, I didn't want to, you asked me not to rehash the article in a lot of depth, so I won't. But one of the things that we left kind of on the table. So
you can rehash the article in depth. It's an awesome article. I just didn't want to lay it on.
No, I get, no, it's all good. So, but let me, it's a fair point. So let me bring out one point though. So it's not just that the sales reps most likely to win were engaging in this thing called Sensemaking, which we've now addressed.
Yeah.
The sales reps, I guess, I don't know, least likely, it might be overstated because we didn't quite study it that way, but there were other information strategies that proved less effective. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And one of them is we call a giving strategy. And giving strategy is that, which is, there's many of us as sales professionals who think that the best thing to do in interacting with customers, in fact, the main thing to do with interacting with customers, is give them the information that they seek. If you want information, I'm going to provide you information. Heck, we live in a world where customers don't ask us for any information anymore. So when they do ask, it's like, amazing. Are you kidding? I could totally get you that white paper, and there's 4 more where that came from, right? It's like, so we think that our main way of providing value to customers is providing information. I have a name for this now. I call this indiscriminate generosity, right? Because we think like, if 1 white paper is a good thing, then 3 white papers must be an amazing thing. So look at all the smart things we have to say because we're a thought leader. And we now know that is really undermining your customer's confidence that much more. It's actually exacerbating a problem rather than overcoming it. Okay, so at the individual level, at the very least, I think we can say is, maybe stop doing that, or maybe at least back off on that a little bit. Before you provide that next piece of information, maybe stop and think about, how is it going to fit in the context of other information? How should they put this together? Give them some guidance on where this fits with the questions they're either asking or frankly need to be asking. And so I think that can be an individual skill, just at that very basic level of just be very careful with information, because it turns out this can be a tool for good or for ill. At the organizational level, where this starts to become team sport in some really cool ways, but certainly an individual could do this, is the thing that I encourage companies now to do. And we learned this from a company called Expedient, which we talk about in the article. Their cloud computing company. Brian Smith is the head of, he's the chief sales and strategy officer. Brian's a brilliant guy. He's a brilliant guy. And one of the things that he and his team did is they sat down. Actually, I don't know if they figuratively at least sat down. I don't know if they actually sat down, but they said, you know what we need to do? We need to do an information audit of all of the information our customers are likely to encounter as part of a purchase of a solution like ours.
Mm-hmm.
Notice that's a very different thing. I was very, I don't know if you cared or even noticed, but I was pretty careful how I phrased it. It was not, we need to do an information audit of all the information consumers can read on our website when buying our solution.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a marketing practice of content marketing. Like what you're like, let's tag all our content, see which gets consumed and what gets shared. That's great to do, but that's not what this is. Let's sit down and do an audit of all of the content from us, from competitors, from trade associations, from advisory firms like Gartner. It's like, let's sit down and take an audit of all the information our customers are likely to encounter as part of a purchase of a solution like ours. Because that's the context. That's the thing that we missed this in challenge. It's not that we didn't get this right. It just wasn't even on our radar screen because this wasn't such an issue 10 years ago as it is today. But now I think it's critical in this time of thought leadership and spamming the world with high quantities of high quality content. And so then you can begin to ask questions. What are they most likely to consume? What are they likely to conclude as a result of that? What are the questions they're likely to have as a result? Where does that content overlap? Where does it conflict? And you could do this as an individual. I think it's easier to do this as a team, but you could do this as an individual. And when you do that, you begin, it's really, you know what it is? It's an exercise in empathy. At least it can be.
Right.
Because then you begin to ask yourself, what does it feel like as a customer to read all this stuff? Am I feeling overwhelmed? Am I feeling confused? What questions am I likely to have? What questions should I have that I'm being guided away from having, right?
Wow.
And so that once you've done that, you can actually begin to say, all right, from the customer's perspective, I can totally see where me providing this white paper here is going to either help or hurt, or I can see how I need to position this white paper in a way that makes more productive. The really weird place this takes you, Kevin, is where it took Brian, and I gave me permission to share the story, so I always do because it's just so mind-boggling to me. When they did this exercise, they found, it's a true story. I'm masking some of it, but it's a true story. They found one piece of content, is a white paper from a competitor that virtually every single one of their customers had encountered. It was almost like canonical. It was like that one white paper you had to read if you're going to make a purchase in cloud, because it laid everything out, it broke everything down. And so Brian's first reaction was, oh, bleep, right? There's this amazing piece of content that everyone's reading and it's from our competitors. This is a horrible thing. His first reaction was, we need a piece of content equally as good, right? So where's our version of that? And I think that's what most of us would do, right? It's like, we need to have an equally good white paper, and we need to figure out SEO and position and placement so that our white paper gets downloaded and consumed instead of the competitor's white paper. Particularly when you think about Expedient, a company most of you probably never heard of, competing in cloud computing against companies all of you have heard about, right? They realize that's a really tough row to hoe, right? I mean, that's like, because there's not just like we have to take the time and the money to create such a piece of research. Then we don't have the branding to compete with that kind of branding. They have good branding, but nothing like, you know, the big dogs of cloud. And so it's likely to be a huge time investment, a huge work investment, and low payoff. So going through all that mental math, what Brian and the team decided is like, what if we do this? Rather than trying to compete head to head our content versus their content, why don't we just use their content? Why don't we actually go to our customers and prospective customers and say, have you read this piece of content from this company? Because if you haven't, you need to read it. It's really fantastic. It's going to lay out, we think they do a really nice job of laying out much of the decision-making process that you need to go through as you go on this journey. By the way, as you read this, we like to think of it in this way. Here's the 3 things that we think you really want to highlight that are over here on page 8. And here's 2 questions that actually don't come up that we think you're going to want to consider because they're really, really important. So in other words, I'm co-opting the competitor's content to have a conversation with my customer that doesn't just teach their content, actually frames it and puts their content and my perspective into a single context. This is, I've come to call this, you know, so much of Challenger is what we called frame breaking. How do I break a mental model? You and I had a long conversation preparation about Piaget and schema theory and mental models.
Yeah.
You remember all that stuff? And so that was
Yeah.
all about breaking frames and getting customers to think differently and changing their sort of cognitive hierarchy. This is less about frame breaking. I would call this frame making. And I think there's huge value in frame making. Just how do I create a framework, a scaffold cognitively for customers to organize information? And that's what Brian and the team are doing. They're not running away from the competitor's content. They're running right at it. They're saying, if you haven't read this, you should. Here's how to think about it. Here's how to put it in context. The value I'm providing isn't the content. Anyone can produce content. The value I'm providing is on a higher level, and it's a much more scarce talent, at least right now, which is a value, which is, how do I organize that content? How do I analyze it? How do I prioritize it? How do I help you on the thinking journey as opposed to the consumption journey? That's pretty cool. That's weird though. It's like, that's like when marketers hear that, their heads just about explode, right? It's like, wait, you want me to use the competitor's content to have a sales conversation? And by the way, I'm not suggesting that that always works or that's even always the right thing to do. But when you start thinking about an information strategy, my point is, it can take you into really unexpected places that you wouldn't have anticipated based on our traditional approach of just producing more content to be a thought leader.
It goes a long, long way to establish your role, right? I think like there could
exactly,
could be no stronger evidence that you are genuinely trying to help them make sense of their puzzle than here's my competitor's, bit on this, and it's wise. So go ahead and read that, and I'll be there for the discussion after you have read it.
Yeah. In fact, you know what Brian says to his team? I've actually been at his SKO and heard him say these words to his team, his entire field team. He said, our job at this company is to help our customers, and by extension, prospective customers, but our job is to help our customers make the best decision that they can in as little time as possible. And there's so much packed into that, right? So our job is to help our customers make the best decision that they can. They're the ones making the decision, not us. They're making. So we're facilitating that discussion in a Socratic way, in a frame-making way. But this goes back to your free consulting point. But notice the second part is in as little time as possible. I want to speed that process of learning such that customers move through it more quickly. Because if we are going to lose, because that competitor's piece of content is still pretty good, I'd rather know that early. It's the old saying in sales, if you're going to lose early, right? The worst place to finish is second, all those old phrases. And that's his point. It's like, look, we're not always going to win. We'll take our fair share, but what I really am competing against is this, call me in 6 months, call me again in 6 months. It's like, we've just got to get more decisions made in less time, and we will win as long as we just keep our share of the pie. I think it's brilliant. It's a gutsy call. That's why I love Brian. He makes gutsy calls, but that's a gutsy call, but I think it's the right one in today's context.
So tell me that's a very cool story. So thank you for sharing it. And I'm glad he's game to put his name out there. You did use him throughout the article and some other research too. So what happens like in the back room when you're collecting all of this kind of information and then throwing away the junk and purifying what's there, and then saying there are patterns in this in these constellations? Most of the people who benefit from your work will never see any of that, and it's probably worth them understanding where these things come from.
Tell me more. Do you mean, where does the research come from, or where does I'm not sure I understood. There's a couple different places I go. I just want to make sure I'm going where you want me to go. Okay,
I'm going to come at this. I'm going to add a little bit more hair on the ball just to make it even worse. You're a poli-sci, applied linguistics, and then MBA guy. You are not a sales guy. You are not Frank Soma, who we interviewed, who was like already acing sales in his late teens, because that was sort of his vintage, and then just has like a treasure chest of personal wisdom, anecdotes, and leadership insights to share. You're like a technician. You're like a modern day Francis Bacon, like tearing open chickens and like measuring the temperature of them and things like that. Right?
It's getting weird, man. But okay,
you're a scientist in this.
I'm a researcher.
Yes, you're a researcher.
That's right. I've spent that's my career. It's 30 years as a researcher, and 20 of those in sales and marketing. Yeah,
but you know who isn't passing out like your books to their interns is sort of like laboratories, right?
Right.
So the people,
although maybe they should. Have you read that last chapter? Matt wrote that chapter. It's really good. How to challenge you outside of the sales context is good stuff. But yes, I take your point.
So I think there's some merit in the people who do read your stuff, whether it was Challenger or now Sensemaking and the things that you're yet to write. In just, where do these ideas come from? What do you see? because it's helpful for them. It was helpful for me to
Yeah.
understand, like, wait a minute, the folks who do this kind of work, like Brent, um, have their hands on very large sets of data, but then they also get very direct personal anecdotes, and they get
Yeah.
field notes and all kinds of things. So how
Yeah.
does that go? How do you end up with all this Gartner data and the story of Brian Smith and his team at Expedient and so on?
Yeah, you talk to a lot of people. I mean, it's just you bathe in this world, you marinate in it. Would pick your metaphor. So I've done this for 20 years. I'll continue. I'm at a company called Ecosystems now, which is we're in the space of value management. And if you haven't heard of value management, this is one of those things like I can count on probably one hand the number of chief sales officers I've ever heard proactively use the term value management, and yet they all should. It's a I'm going to go on to just a slight sidebar for just a second. But
Please.
the value management is, and Ecosystems, particularly, it's a SaaS company. We sell access to our subscription to a software platform, and it's all designed to help suppliers and buyers sit down collaboratively and identify and define the dimensions of value along which they're going to measure a relationship, and then be able to track them in a very elegant way over time. And it's a really incredibly powerful tool for things like driving renewals and expansion sales. And so that's the world I say all that because what's interesting is, Kevin, is in moving in this just one slight, it's not even a step, it's a half step out of my comfort zone of sales into this world of value management, which I now that I'm in it would argue needs to be in sales. Like the fact that this is its own little silo and there's like these centers of excellence that do this just makes no sense, because every single sales and marketing professional needs to do this. But that's what I'm doing now, is I'm beginning to bathe and marinate in this world of C-suite officers who spend their time, their teams, who do this kind of work, and you learn, and you just ask lots of questions, and because I've got this sort of outside perspective as a researcher, I tend to see things with fresh eyes, not always accurate ones, but I just ask lots of questions like, that doesn't make, so I'm the one that can stand up and say, that emperor ain't got no clothes on, right? It's like, this doesn't make sense the way that we're doing this. But the more, if you want, actually, this is gonna sound super self-serving, but it's actually true. So if you want a really accurate nuts to bolts description of how the research process works, we actually laid it out from beginning to end in the Challenger Customer. That entire book, which is the sequel to Challenger Sale, is we don't tell you this, but it is a description of the research methodology that we apply to generate these findings. And at a high level, it has to do with mental modeling, right? So at CEB, we always built, which is the company that I started at that was ultimately acquired by Gartner, but Corporate Executive Board, or CEB. We would first build what we called so we called our clients members. So they were members of the Corporate Executive Board. And so we would build what we called a member model. A member model is simply a mental model of how, say, a head of sales or head of marketing or head of IT, pick your function. So in my case, head of sales. How does a head of sales think their business works? What are the 2 or 3 things they're trying to accomplish? What are the primary drivers of those things? What are the secondary drivers of those, and tertiary drivers? So we build these out in like huge whiteboards, a big piece of paper, slides, whatever. And we have this big diagram of a mental model of how a customer, head of sales, thinks that sales works. And then we step back and look at it and say, huh, I wonder what they missed. I wonder what they overlooked. I wonder if they've actually organized the nodes of this root cause in such in an accurate way. Have they weighted them in an accurate way? Are they deploying investments appropriately? Have they missed a connection, a causal connection that's here that they're not seeing? And then we hypothesize. We build a series of hypotheses. I think what might actually be going, based on everything we're seeing and hearing and talking to hundreds and hundreds of sales leaders every day. We don't talk to hundreds every day. That was overstated. But but over the course of a year, you do talk to scores of heads of sales. That's probably more accurate. You begin to hear things like you talk to the most progressive ones versus the more traditional ones. You begin to see variation in how they're approaching things, and that allows you creates ideas that are hypotheses that you want to test. And you build a model, you test it, and then you kind of put together a picture of how it does work. And you take the model of what does work, and you map it up to the model of the mental model, the original model, and you find where are their gaps, where are their moments of teaching moments, and then you go teach them. I mean, it's that simple, but it kind of is, and that's what we lay out. And if that all sounded intriguing but very quick, that step by step we lay that process out in the Challenger Customer. We tell you in the book that that's about how to create commercial insight, and it is. It just so happens it's actually how we create research. And so I went on the sidebar about value management because that's quite literally the journey I'm on right now. What I'm doing is I'm talking to as many different people as I can in the space of value management to try and get an understanding of how do they think it works? What do they think needs to be done? What do they think are the opportunities? And as I build out that map, then I can begin to ask, what are they overlooking? And I can already see massive gaps of what they're looking at. Just the fact that heads of sales aren't even talking about it is the first massive red flag. Like, this needs to be on everyone's radar screen. So there's a method to this madness. And what I like about it is you can do this as an individual, you can do this as a team, you can do this qualitatively, you can do it quantitatively. But I think the heart and soul, kind of bring it back to what we were talking about before, Kevin, to do this well, what you need more than anything else, I would argue, is empathy.
Yeah.
It's, as I used to say all the time, particularly when we were talking about some of these challenger customer ideas to leaders around the world, is it's a bit of a trick question, so I won't try to trick you on this, but it goes like this. If you want to change the way your customer thinks about their business, what's the first thing you have to understand? That's the question. If you want to change the way a customer thinks about their business, what's the first thing you have to understand? Most people just knee-jerk reactions be after their business. If I want to change the way they think about their business, I got to understand their business. And actually, I think the more accurate answer is, if I want to change the way a customer thinks about their business, the first thing I have to understand is how they think about their business. I've got to get in their mind, I've got to see their mental model, and I've got to picture it from their perspective. And that takes, I call that empathy. Someone else might call that something else. For me, the word empathy works here, which is, how can I get inside their head, figuratively, and see the world from their perspective? How can I understand what they think is important? And then where challenger, I think, is so interesting, and because I'm just a contrarian by heart. Again, if you tell me to zig, I'm going to find 1,000 reasons to zag, just because I'm a pain in the ass, right? So this is because the way my brain is wired, I'm just enough of a jackass to say, once I get in that head and see that mental model, I'm going to ask the question, like, what can we do to, like, what happens if I press this button? Or what happens if I, like, well, they got that wrong. Come on now. He's like, I've always like, what can I break? What can I mess up? Like, what can I change? I'm a tinkerer. So what I'm doing is, it's funny, I've never really thought about it this way, but effectively, I think that's what describes my career best. I'm a tinkerer. I just tinker with mental models as opposed to gadgets. That was deep.
Yeah. You know what? Because I've worked in academies, and so we have to take to people the things that they know that they want to learn, and then things that they aren't sure about but they want fresh exposure to. And of course, you just see the hackneyed old topics and so on, and empathy's got to be in that basket. And the thing that you were just raising is empathy can have this extremely technical, detailed, practical edge to it. Typically, when people are instructed to be empathetic with their clients, it sort of has this armchair feeling. It's like, all right, ready? We're going to turn the lights down low and play soft music.
Right.
And now you just empathize with your clients. Like, all right. Like, was this like a long tea I need to have, or what? But the stuff.
Well, the other thing on that, Kevin, is empathy is often, I think, associated with compassion. It's with goodness. Like, you need to be empathetic to be good. I don't know if this is a different definition of empathy, or if maybe I'm talking about something else altogether, but I'm actually very careful with empathy, because I think empathy can be used for ill as well as for good. In other words, if I can understand someone's mental model really, really well, effectively, it puts me in the position of being able to manipulate that mental model. And I can manipulate in all sorts of different directions. And you see this in examples of politicians, and I won't name names. You could go through the history of the human race, and you could see people doing horrible, unspeakable things by being able to manipulate audiences. And I think that's because they've been able to get in their head and see the world from their perspective and speak to them in such a way that resonates. I don't know, is that empathy, or have I stepped out? I don't know, but so I'm always, what that does, it tells me, by the way, this isn't just a philosophical discussion. This is something I'm always hyper aware of in my work, is this need to be careful, right? And need to be accurate and check things and ask yourself, what's a dark mirror, the black mirror, what's the show is like, where they take all the good stuff and show you like the bad version of that. Like, what happens, like what's if you take this and play it out like in the bad version of this, what happens? And so and sometimes you just miss things, like, how can challenger backfire and be used for evil, perhaps, things like that. So I think to me, when you start talking about empathy, I think you talk about something very, very powerful, but something that needs to be respected very deeply.
Yeah, it is. There's in sales training, negotiation training, a little bit in marketing, we see this there's like a bronze rule, it's like the golden rule, which is to do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. The silver rule is supposed to be to not do unto others as you would not have them do unto you, which which is sort of like the way libertarians broadly think about things.
Yeah.
Leave me the hell alone.
Yep.
And the bronze rule, I suppose, is one that we just use there. It's like, you should, if you teach or train or write or instruct, you should be writing it and teaching in such a way as you'd be happy for the clients of these people or the prospects of these people to be in the room listening to what you're saying to them. And
Oh,
this
that's
is
interesting. Yeah.
that's sort of one what would you say, kind of a rule of thumb or an easy test. The idea, this technical empathy thing, though, I think is very interesting. It's giving people really practical edges, like walk a
Yeah.
mile in their shoes. I know I actually mean it. Go figure out what are they going to read after they get off the phone with you and get exposed to the fact that you have a WIMWAM or a platform or a software that you think is going to change their life. What are they going to do next? They're going to call a friend. Which friend? What does that friend have to say? That's a really practical edge on empathy, is what information will they consume when you're describing that information audit.
And just the more, like, the super obvious practical one, which we don't like to do because it takes us to tough places. Like, if someone were to do this to you, how would you feel? If someone were to cold call you, how would you answer the phone? Right? It's like, this is no, and I hate it, and I wouldn't do that. And it's like, then why are you doing it to others? It's like, well,
Yeah,
I don't know, because I don't know what else to do. It's like, so that's why we don't do that exercise, because it takes you to this really bad place of despair. And that's why I do what I do, is like give you an answer, something else other than despair. Like, well, here's something else you can at least try. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and for what it's worth, this is always, whether it's challenge or sense making, the work I'll be doing on value management, it's not like here's the answer. And I sometimes that gets thrown back at me, like Adamson claims this, or the guys at Gartner or whoever, Matt and Brent, say this. What we're always trying to do is like, here's something else to try. There's all of this is a game of probabilities. None of it's meant to be a guarantee. And it's like, based on everything we're seeing, this makes sense. This feels right to try this based on everything we're seeing in research and in qualitative, quantitative evidence. This feels like if you're going to place a bet, this feels like a good place to place a bet, because otherwise you're stuck back with, what else do you want me to do? It is like, well, try this. And that's kind of the way I think about the work that I do. It's more from the spirit of, give this a shot. And I can't guarantee it'll work, but it feels like a good bet to place.
We are overtime already. So I want to do a couple of things. One, I want to get a book recommendation from you. So I'm going to buy you a little time of just, and I don't think what's awesome and cool and popular. I mean, whatever weird things you're reading. We've already established that you read pretty off the center line stuff from time to time. So a fun, interesting book rec. Meanwhile, ecosystem, value management, your own writing, where should people look you up, check you out, read what you're reading?
For those who want to, so I'm kind of out on LinkedIn is probably the easiest place to track me down very quickly. The company is ecosystems.us. We're working on that domain right now, by the way. So this IO is probably where it's going to go eventually, but the ecosystems.us. Also, for those who are interested in this value management idea, on our website, there's a resources tab, and below that is what we call the customer value community, which is it's a large community of over 1,000 people who are engaged in value management. And if that's something that's either intriguing to you or you're actually active in it now, we'd love to have you part of that community. There's a ton to learn there, Kevin. Hopefully, maybe I'll be back sometime. We can talk about what's going on there, because the fact that this is sort of this overlooked skill of sales doesn't make any sense to me. So
who is that? Like, classically, who are those characters? Are these CTOs?
Well, it's this is what I'm
CEOs?
learning. It's really interesting. So this is a discipline that in many ways got its start at SAP probably about 20 years ago. And there's like this SAP diaspora. There's C-suite level executives who run sort of value management, usually centers of excellence. So you might even see like chief value officer or chief value management officer. And they'll have teams, and they're usually almost like a sales engineering team that sits next to sales and helps them run in the most basic way. There's like ROI calculators, but it's not. It's more than that, and particularly when you start applying challenger techniques to it, it could be way more than that. But to leave this in the hands of a small few math people who run this for you doesn't make any sense. It's a discipline that, I mean, think about it. It's like, think about having a discipline and a tool to sit down with your customer and say, all right, how are we going to measure value in this in this
Mm,
relationship? Like, what are the dimension? Like, what's important to you? And that's where challenging them is like, have you considered this as well? Here's another dimension that may be important to you. So that's where I think there's got a challenge or flavor to it.
wow.
And then you just map out the dimension. Like, all right, so here are the things we're trying to achieve. Here's the KPIs that we're going to measure that tell us whether or not we're achieving those objectives. Here's a nice slick software system to help us figure that out. And then we're going to put it in there and just track it over time, and that we can run reports on all that kind of stuff. That's the software part that I'm involved in now. But this idea, particularly as everything moves from 3-year contracts to monthly renewals, and now really interesting, which is blowing my mind, consumption-based, right? So a lot of a lot of SaaS companies are now moving into consumption-based metrics, where it's not even a monthly renewal. It's just like, I pay for what I use. Being able to demonstrate the value of what you're providing becomes critical in this world. So this is why I made the move for lots of different reasons. This is why I made the move. This is why I went to where I went, because I think this is where things need to go. And I think there's just a massive opportunity for all of us to understand this technique better. So I'm super interested in that. So anyway, so Ecosystems is the company, ecosystems.us is the website, and hit me up on LinkedIn if you want to know more. I'm always happy to talk more about. But yeah, if you get into, it's mostly SaaS, companies like SAP, ServiceNow, Palo Alto Networks. The second two are customers of ours now, but they have massive is the wrong word, but they have incredibly advanced teams who do this kind of work. And they're beginning where they're going is where I think we all need to go, is think of this less as a function or a center of excellence, and think of this more as a discipline that spreads across the entire organization, from the top of the funnel in marketing all the way down through sales and landing to implementation, to success, to service, to expansion. What is the red thread that runs through that whole thing? And I think that's this idea of defining dimensions of value and tracking them over time and expanding on them. And so this is something I think not only does everyone have to be involved in it, but the handoffs across all, because those are all different functional silos. And so you need some sort of means to keep that consistent across that entire process and all across all those different people. And I don't think that's why that's not on people's radar screens more than it is, kind of boggles my mind.
When
So
you
stay
describe
tuned
it,
on
it
that.
just screams professional services, actually. Law
Yeah.
and like government focused consultancy, things that classically have funny value parameters, very abstracted value parameters.
Yeah, and that's what's cool about this, is because if you do this right, and again, the software that I'm now involved in is so cool, is it'll helps you capture. It's not just an ROI calculator, even an ROI calculator on steroids. It helps you capture those qualitative metrics as well as the quantitative ones. Helps you kind of the abstract ones and put numbers around them when appropriate. But to essentially be able to say, because we're all going to have that conversation with our customer at some points, like, should we up for another year, or was it worth it, or did we get our money's worth? And that's a really hard conversation to have unless you've actually defined from the very beginning, how are we going to decide that? What's the yardstick, the metric that we're going to use to even have that conversation, let alone come to a decision? And so that is, I think, the thing that's lacking right now in a lot of companies, is I've kind of then scramble at the last minute and say, well, you use a lot of our services, and we get into utilization discussions instead. So there you go. Watch this space.
Bookmark a time.
Yes.
If you like, September would be ideal. I'll be in North America. We launched our Canada office in a town called
Congrats.
Lethbridge, just bringing it back to how we started the conversation. Sage now has a Canada office, but I'll be there. Let's book a conversation entirely dedicated to value management.
That'd be awesome. And it's just south of Banff. So maybe we could go to Banff and have the conversation at the Banff Springs Hotel.
Well, naturally.
Who wouldn't do that? On the veranda looking out over the Bow Valley. Oh my God. So that's heaven. That is heaven on earth, as far as I'm concerned.
It really is. It really is. I was describing that landscape to someone who was asking, why would you go there? What's to see? It's like, do you know when some people have this turn of phrase, breathtaking? That's the one place that I know where when you turn a certain corner and you just see the mountain peaks sort of peeking down at you, just the scale and the sort of epic dimensions and the distance really does make you take shorter breaths.
I'd agree.
It's remarkable.
That and the Swiss Alps. I mean, maybe I'm just a mountain guy. It's because I grew up in Nebraska in the U.S., right, where it's like all flat and there's nothing to see for miles. someone actually, it was about Texas and Plano, Texas, but same thing in Nebraska. Someone told me in Plano, Texas once, it's so flat here, you can watch your dog run away for 3 days.
Yes.
Still kills me. Anyway.
Book
You want the
recommendation.
All right. So book recommendation. I'm going to do, you asked me to zig, so I'm going to zag. This is actually self-flagellation moment. I don't read anymore, and I don't know what's wrong with me. I think I'm broken. It's ADD. I struggle now to read, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. I got a lot of books back here. Most of those are fiction, by the way. But and where I spend my time consuming content is in podcasts. And the 2 podcasts I listen to most now are Pivot, Pivot. Pivot is Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway. Many will know that one, Business and Technology. And then the one that I got hooked on, Kevin, that you would dig this. It's a podcast that's been around, believe it or not, since 2010, I think. So I didn't know we had podcasts back then. It's called Stuff You Should Know. And Stuff You Should Know is these 2 guys just talk about literally anything and everything. And they put out 2 episodes a week, and you never know what they're going to talk about. Because it's like, it could be science, it could be politics, it could be chemistry, it could be a book, it could be a social movement. It's like, and they just have a witty banter way of talking about it, helping you understand it. And they've got over 2,000 episodes in the can. Think about that. So there's the back catalog is insane. I know, right? So I just run that on constant. Like every time I get in the car, every time I'm walking the dog, I'm just running some sort of podcast. That's when because the rest of the time I'm just too dang busy. And so I think I go to bed at night thinking, okay, now I'm gonna sit down and crack open a book, and I fall asleep. So I don't know. When do you have time to consume, like, to read anymore? That's what I find, because I don't carve out time to do it. It's really frustrating, but maybe I should.
Yeah, Audible has been I think basically I'm listening to podcasts. It's just they happen to be books. But Audible has completely changed the, you got to water the garden. Well, there's 15 minutes and, you can knock off substantial number of paragraphs if you read at speed or listen at
particularly
speed.
at 2x.
2x is great.
Twice. Yeah,
it's great.
It's kind of how I talk anyway. I always wanted to do the one podcast where the people would have to listen to it at half speed just because I talk so fast.
That's right. That's right. Okay. When we record this one, we're going to keep me at regular speed and we're going to slow you down to 0.75.
It's probably good. That's probably not a bad idea. All right, man.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
It's great fun, Kevin.
Yep. We'll be in touch. Absolutely. And if we don't have a good excuse to say hello, it's September for value management.
Cool. That sounds awesome. I love that idea. Good. All right.
Okay. Adios.
Cheers. All right. I'll talk to you soon.